Alright, I see my Twitch chat is already up, and then also YouTube is up. Alright, we are golden then. Hello everybody, and welcome back to another Midnight Molly stream. I am allowed to do this because I don't have to wake up extremely early in the morning tomorrow, thankfully. I'm so tired after today. I need all the sleep I can get at this point. It may not be beauty sleep, but sleep is still sleep. But, as a little review, I don't care. Get out of here, spam bot. God, I can stay at 0 viewers all I want, and that's fine. At this point, I am honestly more angry about all the stupid spam and porn bots. God. Just let me do my own thing at this point. Get the heck out of here. Oh wait, I forgot, that's right. You're soulless machines that don't actually know anything. How could I forget? But, to get back on track, yesterday/last night, we read a bunch of Akutagawa works, starting with Rashomon, which was a kind of philosophical/moral debate about what a person is sort of willing to do when it comes to their own survival or their morals. Is it better for them to, die and starve, or is it better for them to fight for every food, even if what they have to do is wrong? Followed that up with The Nose, where it's about a guy's appearance, and him trying to basically fix a part that he doesn't like, and then becoming a bit perturbed by the absence of it, and it being normal is now seen as strange before it returns to its old self. And then after The Nose was The Liquor Worm, another sort of thing about what it means to sort of lose a part of yourself, and also maybe just about alcoholism. And then, of course, there's two fun tales. Sweet Yam Soup, about the just cruelty of Japan and some of the people, where one of the it still kills me, just the the opening and introduction, where it's just lambasting this guy for not being good. Everyone hates him. There's examples of how people hate him. Children don't respect him. His own compatriots don't respect him. The people serving under him don't respect him. Just his entire life is filled with nothing but just awful things. And then The Devil and Tobacco, where the devil loses a bet to some newly Christian guy about planting tobacco seeds and him being able to guess the flower of it. However, in a way, he still comes out victorious because now tobacco is on Japan, and he can continue to make sinners out of Christians. So, moving on from this, I'm gonna move over to the reading stream because we're continuing with Fortune. Through the workshop's roughly woven entrance blind, it was easy to see the people coming and going. An endless stream of pilgrims passed by on the road to Kiyomizudera Temple. A priest with a brass gong around his neck, a woman in pilgrimage outfit, and then the rare sight of a yellow ox hauling a wicker walk carriage. Okay, the yellow ox is appearing yet again because it was in The Devil and Tobacco. All came and went each moment from left or right, viewed through the sparse bulrush blind. Only the earthy color of the narrow path remained unchanged, scorching in the spring afternoon sun. Inside, a young, low-ranking samurai, who'd been observing the traffic in silence, all at once addressed the potter. Crowds of pilgrims for Kannon, as ever. Indeed, the potter might have sounded irritated, but he was concentrating on his work. But there was nothing malicious in the face or demeanor of this old man with small eyes, an upturned nose, and a somehow droll air about him. In his hemp kimono and drooping cap, he recalled a character in the picture scrolls of Toba Sojo, a well-regarded artist at the time. I've been thinking about starting daily pilgrimage myself, the samurai said. If I don't get somewhere in the world soon, I swear I can't stand it. You're joking, I presume. What? I'd happily become a believer in exchange for some good fortune. Daily pilgrimages or holding myself away in a temple, it'd be cheap at the price. Just a little business with the gods and Buddhas. The samurai spoke with the hollow confidence of youth, licking his lower lip and glancing impatiently around the workshop. This was a stifling small straw-thatched shack, standing in front of a bamboo grove. In contrast to the bustle outside the blind, the earthenware pots and jars were as still as if they hadn't moved for a century. A spring breeze brushed against their reddish-brown surfaces, and there weren't even any swallows nesting in the building's roof to disturb the stillness. The old potter didn't reply, so the samurai went on. You must have seen and heard a lot in all your years. What do you think? Does cannon really bring people good fortune? Indeed. In the old ways, I sometimes heard such stories. What kind of stories? Nothing I could tell in a single breath. I'm also going to, as I forgot, lower the volume on this. Hopefully I was still able to be heard. What kind of stories? Nothing I could tell in a single breath, and nothing you'd find of much interest anyway. That's a shame, but I do have a little faith. If I finally got myself some fortune, then tomorrow... Faith, you say, or an eye for business. The corners of the old potter's eyes wrinkled as he chuckled. Now he'd made the shape of a pot from the clay he'd been kneading. He seemed to be at ease. A boy like you wouldn't understand how the gods and Buddhists think. Maybe I don't. That's why I'm asking you. It's not about whether they bestow fortune. It's about whether that fortune is good or bad. But you'd... Sorry, my nose is really itchy right now. But you'd know if you got it, whether it was good or bad. I think it would be hard for someone like you to know. Never mind whether the fortune is good or bad. It's that way of reasoning that I don't understand. The sun was beginning to set and the shadows in the street grew longer, like the ones trailing behind two women bearing wooden tubs on their heads who passed by the blinds. One held a cherry blossom branch, likely a souvenir to brighten up her home. The woman who sells hemp yarn at the Western Market is one example. Like I've been saying, I want to hear one of your stories. The two fell into silence for a while, and the young samurai plucked hairs from his chin with his nails while he gazed out at the street, where fallen cherry blossoms shone white like seashells. Won't you tell me one? The samurai asked drowsily. Well then, since you ask, I'll tell you a story, but it's just another tale of bygone days. With this prologue, the old potter began to speak in the leisurely manner of those who have no sense whether a day is long or short. It must have been 30 or 40 years ago. When that woman was still a girl, she went on a retreat to Kiyomizudera Temple, to beseech Kannon to grant her a life of comfort. Her mother had just passed on, and she was struggling to get by from day to day, so it was quite natural that she should make such a prayer. Her mother had been a priestess at the Hakushusha shrine, and was much sought after for a time, but then a rumor spread that she was summoning fox spirits, and people stopped going there. I mean, she was a large woman with white pockmarks and a vibrancy not befitting her age, and yet she had a certain allure. I don't know about foxes, but men... I'd rather hear about the girl than her mother. My apologies indeed. When her mother died, the girl was thrown on her limited resources, and no matter what she earned, it wasn't enough to live. So that smart, enchanting girl even felt ashamed about going on a retreat in the temple on account of her ragged clothes. Was she really such a beauty? She was. I might be partial, but I'd say she wouldn't shame you anywhere, whether for her face or disposition. A pity it's a story of past times, the samurai said, tugging at the sleeve of his faded blue robe. The old potter snorted with laughter and kept talking, while the bush warbler sang in the bamboo grove behind the building. After 21 days of the temple retreat, on the final night, she had a dream. One of her companions there, a hunchbacked priest, was always reciting a Dharani of some such Sanskrit mantra. This was probably preying on her mind. As she began to doze, she could hear his voice. It wouldn't leave her ears. It was as if the worms were crying out from under the veranda. And at some point, the words of the mantra seemed to say, "On your way home, a man will speak to you. You should listen to what he says." She awoke with a start to find the priest still absorbed in his recitation, but no matter how hard she tried to follow, she couldn't understand his words now. When she turned, she saw Cannon's face in the faint light of the night lantern. It was the same majestic expression she'd become familiar with from staring at it through her days of retreat, and she had the uncanny sensation that someone was saying, "You should listen to what he says." It became the girl's earnest belief that this was a message from Cannon. Dear me. Later that night, she was walking down the gentle slope from the temple toward 5th Street, when, sure enough, a man threw his arms around her from behind. It was a warm spring night, but she couldn't see his face in the darkness or what he was wearing. Only as she tried to pull away, she touched his mustache. What an extraordinary happening on the night she completed her prayers. He wouldn't tell her his name or where he was from. He just ordered her to do what he said and forced her to the north along the street below the slope, still with his arms wrapped around her. For all her crying and screaming, there was no help, as it was a time when almost nobody was around. And what then? He took her up to the pagoda in the Yasakadera temple, and that's where she spent the night. And there's no need for an old man like me to explain to you what happened there. The old potter again creased his eyes in laughter. The shadows in the street had grown longer. The cherry petals, blown by the breeze, were now white dots among stones wet with raindrops that had fallen from eaves. It's no joking matter. The samurai kept plucking his beard and then, as if he'd suddenly just remembered, asked, "And that's the end of the story?" If that was all there was, it wouldn't be a tale worth telling. The potter continued to work the clay. When dawn came, the man must have believed they had some connection from a previous life, because he asked her to become his wife. Incredible. I see. Even if this wasn't part of the dream she'd had, the girl felt that it was what Cannon wanted, so in the end, she nodded her consent. They made some token vows with sake in a brief ceremony, and then he brought out 10 rolls of twilled fabric and 10 rolls of silk from the back of the pagoda, saying that they were for her immediate use. I imagine you'd struggle to do the same. The young samurai just smirked and made no response. The bush warbler had stopped singing by this time. Then the man said he'd return by nightfall, and he dashed out, leaving the girl by herself. After that, she was all the more lonely. Even a smart girl like her felt disheartened under the circumstances. She wandered to the back of the pagoda to lift her spirits, and what did she find? Not only twilled fabric and silk, but also jewels, gold dust, and other valuables lined up in several leather cases. Stout-hearted though she was, the sight flabbergasted her. With these kinds of treasures, there was no doubt about it. If he wasn't a bandit, he was a thief. Now her loneliness was spurred on by a sudden terror, and she felt she couldn't stay there a moment longer. She thought of the reformed criminals who work for the police. If they captured her, who knew what might happen? Just as she turned to rush out through the door, a dry voice from behind the leather cases asked who was there. She'd thought she was alone, so she was stupefied. Curled up in the middle of the piled up sacks of gold dust was a creature somewhere between a human and a sea cucumber. This was a diminutive, bleary-eyed nun of around 60, hunched and covered in wrinkles. Whether she knew the girl's intentions or not, she shuffled forward on her knees and made her introduction in an unexpectedly wheedling voice. The girl had no time for such a fuss, but fearing there could be trouble if she was suspected of trying to escape, she reluctantly rested her elbows. I'm so tired, what the heck? She reluctantly rested her elbows on a leather case and made half-hearted small talk. The nun worked for the man, cooking and performing other chores, but she didn't mention anything about his line of business. And she was hard She was hard of hearing, so the girl had to keep repeating everything she said until she wanted to burst into tears. This went on until around midday. Then, in the middle of rambling about how the cherry blossoms had bloomed at Kiyomizudera and the bridge was completed at 5th Street, the old woman nodded off. Maybe this was due to her age, or perhaps it was because the girl's responses were unsatisfactory. The girl seized the opportunity, checking for the sound of the woman's sleeping breath and creeping to the entrance where she tried opening the door a fraction. Luckily, there was no sign of anyone outside. If she'd run for it then, she'd have got clean away, but she remembered the fabric and silk she received that morning and returned to the leather cases. Then, to her horror, she somehow stumbled on a sack of gold dust and touched the nun's knee. The old woman's eyes opened wide in shock, and she sat there speechless for some moments before grasping hold of the girl's legs in a frenzy. Then she started gabbling in a voice full of tears. When the girl put together the fragments that came into her ears, it seemed that the nun was terrified about what awful fate she'd meet if the girl were to escape. But with her own life also at stake, the girl had no sympathy for such a view. At last, the two began to grapple together. Another stupid bot. And another yawn. So tired, I guess. They were hitting and kicking each other and throwing sacks of gold dust. There was such a commotion you'd think the rats would tumble from their nests in the beams. In this kind of death struggle, you couldn't dismiss the old woman's strength, but still, the age difference was there. By the time the girl sneaked out of the pagoda door, breathless and with fabric and silk tucked under her arm, the nun was silent. I heard later that her body was discovered face up in a dark corner, with a little blood leaking from the nose and the head dusted all over with gold. After leaving Yasakadera, it's no surprise that the girl would feel out of place in a merchant's quarter with so many townhouses, so she went to the home of a friend who was a poor day laborer, by where 5th Street meets Kyogoku Street. This friend was most hospitable, boiling up water and making her rice gruel. Maybe the present of a roll of silk did no harm. Finally, she could catch her breath. As will I. Jeez. I'm relieved too, the young samurai said, plucking his fan from his belt and dexterously flapping it as he gazed out at the sunset through the blind. 5 or 6 attendants, dressed in white, passed by howling with laughter, their shadows lingering in the street. So that's how it all ended? No, said the old potter with an exaggerated shake of his head. While she was in her friend's home, there was a clamor outside, and she heard voices hurling abuse and crying out, over there, over there. With all the shady business she'd been involved in, the girl was filled with dread. Wondering if the thief had come for revenge, or if she was being pursued by the police, she was in no state to eat her gruel. I can imagine. Through a crack in the door, she spied an impressive group of police, including several former criminals, being led by an officer through a crowd of spectators. The police were dragging a man tied up with rope. His robe was torn here and there, and he'd lost his black cap. It seemed they were taking a captured robber to his home so that they could search it. The robber was the man she'd encountered on the slope to 5th Street the previous night. For some reason, her eyes filled with tears. As she told me herself, it wasn't that she'd fallen in love with him, but she felt a sudden self-pity when she saw him under arrest and cried despite herself. When I heard her story, it moved me too. What do you mean? It makes you think about praying to Canon. But tell me, how did the girl get by after that? She didn't just get by. Now she's got all the money she needs, and selling that fabric and silk was the first step to prosperity. In this sense, Canon kept her promise. Then she did get something out of it, after everything she went through. The sunlight outside had taken on a yellowish tinge, and the wind in the bamboo grove was faintly audible. For some time now, nobody had passed by. Becoming a murderer and the wife of a thief were just things she had to do, whether she liked it or not. The young samurai put his fan back in his belt and stood up, The old potter was cleaning his clay-baked hands with water from a pitcher. Both seemed to find something lacking in the fading spring day and the other sentiments. She was lucky anyway, the samurai said. You're joking, I'm sure. She was, and that's what you think too. Me? I wouldn't take that kind of fortune for anything. Really? I'd snap it up like a shot. Then show your devotion to Canon. I will. I'll begin my temple retreat tomorrow. I have no clue what to even take about this story, other than I guess she was lucky in a way that only came after suffering, basically. That I get, in order to even be considered lucky, you have to go through something awful. Maybe it's just about, like, perspective at that point. But who knows? Maybe it's just a weird little story. Oh boy. But there's still another story. The Spider's Thread, which this one might have been one for Limbus. I will only figure out after I read it. But little water break, just because I need it. Oh boy. And this one is a multi-chapter one, it seems. Fun. The Spider's Thread. In paradise one day, Buddha was taking a solitary stroll around a lotus pond. The pure white flowers looked like jewels in the water, and an indescribably fine smell from the golden seed pods in their centers suffused the air at all times. It must have been morning in paradise. Then Buddha halted on the edge of the pond to observe, between the lotus leaves that massed across its surface, what was happening below. Directly beneath the pond were the depths of hell, and the Sanzu River and Mountain of Needles were clearly visible through the crystal water, like looking into a showman's peep box. Buddha's eyes stopped to rest on a man called Kandata, who was squirming with the other sinners. This Kandata was a bandit who'd killed people and burned houses to the ground among a litany of evil acts, but even so, he had one good deed to his name. It happened that when he was passing through a deep forest, he saw a tiny spider crawling by the side of the path. He lifted his foot and was just about to crush the creature when he thought, no, it may be small, but it's alive, and it would be a shame to deprive it of life without reason. So he let the spider go on unharmed. While Buddha observed hell, he remembered how Kandata had spared the spider. As reward for his one good deed, he thought that, if possible, he'd like to rescue this man from perdition. As fortune had it, he saw one of the spiders of paradise beside him on a lotus leaf the color of jade, spinning a magnificent silver thread. With gentle hands, he took the thread and lowered it straight down between the jewel-like white lotuses to hell far below. In the depths of hell, Kandata rose and fell with the other sinners in the pool of blood. It was a place of unfathomable despair, pitch black in all directions, save for an occasional glinting from the Mountain of Needles. All was as quiet as the grave, apart from the faint lamenting of the sinners. These wretches who'd fallen so low were already exhausted from the pains of hell and lacked the strength to even cry out. The great bandit Kandata himself, stifled by blood, could only writhe like a dying frog. But then it happened. Kandata lifted his head for no particular reason to look at the sky above the pool of blood and spotted through the silent darkness a silver spider's thread. It was descending from the far distant heavens with the faintest of gleams as it feared drawing attention to itself while it dropped in his direction. When he sighted it, he clapped his hands in joy, clinged to the thread and climbed as high as he could, and he'd surely escaped from hell. If all went well, he might even get into paradise. Then he wouldn't be made to climb the Mountain of Needles or be sunk in the pool of blood. The thought in mind, he gripped the spider's thread firmly with both hands and hauled himself upward with all his strength. As a bandit, he was well experienced in such matters. But there were so many thousands of leagues between hell and paradise that for all his haste, it was no easy task to reach his destination. After climbing for some time, Kandata was worn out and unable to ascend another handhold. He took a rest despite himself, and hanging midway up the thread, gazed far below him. He saw the reward of his efforts. The pool of blood he'd come from was now lost in the depths of darkness, and the glinting, terrible mountain of needles was also somewhere far beneath his feet. At this rate, if he kept on climbing, he might really get out of hell. As he hung there, his hands entwined around the spider's thread, he laughed in a voice that he hadn't used in all the years since he'd arrived there. I did it! I did it! But then he noticed the countless sinners lowered down, following after him like a line of ants, all set on clambering up the spider's thread. Stunned and horrified, for some time he remained with his great mouth open like an idiot, only his eyes moving. How could such a fine thread, which seemed like it would break from his weight alone, support so many people? If by some chance it did snap while his task was incomplete, then he, the first climber, who'd put in so much effort to get this far, would plunge back into hell. That would be unspeakable. And all the while, hundreds and thousands of sinners were diligently crawling in a single line up the faintly shining spider's thread from the pitch-black pool of blood. If he didn't act quickly, the thread would break. Kandata yelled out, "Hey sinners, this is my spider's thread. Who said that you could climb it? Get off! Get off!" Just then, the thread that had easily withstood everything so far broke with an audible snap from where Kandata was hanging. There was nothing the bandit could do. The next moment, he was falling through the air, spinning like a top, headlong into the depths of darkness. The shortened spider's thread glistened as it hung down from the middle of a sky without moon or stars. Buddha stood at the edge of the lotus pond, watching this episode as it played out in all its detail. When Kandata finally sank like a stone into the pool of blood, however, he began strolling again with a doleful expression, surely saddened by the abject nature of the bandit's merciless heart, in his desire to be the only one to escape from hell, and by the fitting punishment he received in tumbling back there. But the lotuses in the paradise pond were indifferent. The jewel-like sepals of the white flowers swayed around Buddha's feet, and an indescribably fine smell from the golden seed pods in their centers suffused the air at all times. It must have been almost noon in paradise. Honestly, sad story there. A man who, even in hell after his one good deed, still couldn't be saved, despite being given this chance. It was just in his nature to always be evil. And, unfortunately, I do actually kind of want an audience, because the next one is Hellscreen. And reading Hellscreen is very important because Ryoshu and her canto just finished up. So I'm actually going to cut stream very short, unfortunately. Because even as much as I am going to get into it and not like the opening of it, I still just want someone. So, I'm probably not going to be streaming for a bit. It depends on how the next few days go, because one, there's a project I still probably should do, and two, I actually want to try to edit some shorts out of the streams that I've done. I've realized that I definitely need to be doing stuff like that, so I need to set aside a time for it. So, thank you everyone who showed up, or whoever's gonna, watch the VOD. Hope you have a good night. Hope you enjoyed the two stories, Fortune and A Spider's Thread. And I'll see you next time, where I will read Hellscreen.